I am here with an old friend, Chuck Wooley. This is the 17th interview or installment, as I'd like to say, in the legends of the steel pipe business. And we're here in Scottsdale, Arizona. We're at the fall conference for the NASPD, and Chuck, you were gracious enough to give me a few minutes of your time today.
I would be a pimple on the legends.
Oh, I don't know about that. I mean, how long have you been in the steel pipe business?
I started in the steel business in '64.
And how old were you in 1964?
I would have been 26.
26 years old. What kind of steel business exactly?
We were pipe and structural and plate, and I started in the bar bay, pulling bars. 6 months later, I was a shift foreman, running a crew of about 60 people.
And where was this at?
Eugene, Oregon, Far West Steel Corporation.
Oh, sure.
And worked my way all the way through the warehouse, inventory control, pricing control. I went into sales, which was what my dream was, and I was in there about a month, and the guy that was running the pricing control and taking care of all of that was going on vacation, 2 weeks. He had a master's degree in business. He was working 12, 13 hours a day, and they put me in there and told me just do the best you can. Sat with him for 2 days, and then he went on vacation, and at the fourth day the controller come by at 10 o'clock in the morning. I was reading a book. He says, "Aren't you going to do Mr. Blaine's work?" I said, "I think his work is all done." And they went up and checked in the computer room, and he came back and he said, "You made a couple of changes?" I said, "Yes." "Don't do that without my authorization." I said, "Okay." End of 2 weeks, they called me in and said, "Monday morning, that's your job."
Is that right?
He went out in shipping. Anyway, wound up with 26 salesmen working under me, and I was running all the pricing and quotations.
And that was everything to do from wire rod, bar?
Wire rod, bar, rebar, plate, flame cutting. We had all the latest in cutting facilities. Had 3 shears operating.
What brought you to Far West Steel? Got you? How did that happen?
I was working in a plywood business in a mill as a shipping clerk, and my brother-in-law worked in the steel company, and he brought me over there. He said, "You ought to work here." He said, "A lot more money and everything else." I said, "Okay, but it has to be under the understanding that nobody knows we're related. I'm not writing your shirt deal. I make my own ways." And we agreed upon that, and after about 4 years, he left the company. 2 years later, they found out we were related. Naturally, there was a big to-do about how that was kept quiet all that time, but
So
I left.
Obviously worked out.
Oh yeah, left there, went into the fabrication business, and then from there into sales engineering for a company.
So when you left Far West, you say you went into fabrication?
Right.
What company was that, and where was that?
That was a company called Crater Iron out of Central Point, Oregon, down at Medford. And from there I went to work for a company called MacFab Manufacturing out of Portland. And that's when I moved to Coeur d'Alene. And we were in the wood products machinery business, and I was doing a lot of the sales engineering work. But with the downturn in the lumber industry, they went by the wayside. And from there I worked at Atlas Boiler in Spokane as their sales rep. From there to a gray iron foundry, sales manager there. Took it from $500,000 in sales in 4 years to over $4 million.
And what was the name of that company, Chuck?
That company was Hearn Iron Works. It was a cast iron company
In Spokane?
Coeur d'Alene.
In Coeur d'Alene?
Yeah. And from there, I went into, started another company called Empire Steel. And from that, I went to Bowman and Associates.
So Empire Steel, was that in Coeur d'Alene or?
Yeah, Coeur d'Alene.
Coeur d'Alene. What were they? Were they a local distributor?
Yeah, just a local distributor for the machine shops. And we did deliveries up to the mine and custom work for the mines and stuff like that. We had flame cutting facilities.
Meaning, a lot of people don't realize that when you say the mines, we're talking about the Silver Valley.
Right.
In Kellogg, Idaho, and
Right.
Lucky Strike mines. A lot of people don't know where we're from.
Well, yes, and Wallace, a town of about 2,000, a friend of mine has a small business there. It's called Northwest Mine Supply, but he has Ace Hardware as well. And that little company, when the mining district went down, everybody left, but everybody still called Wallace, Idaho to get their materials. That little company has, what I was told, 93 million in a year out of a town of 2,000 people. So there's a lot of neat businesses that were developed up there. And from that, working with Bowman and Associates until they went bankrupt, I worked in mining areas and did some very sizable projects. And then when Bowman went bankrupt, I was stuck. He owed me $37,000 in commissions, which I naturally didn't get. But being that I was owed a lot of money, the suppliers understood the situation. So when I started CW Sales, everybody is willing to do business with me.
Sure. Now, going back to that, when you had left Empire in Coeur d'Alene to go to work for Bowman and Associates, you and I obviously know who Bowman and Associates
Right.
and what that was all about. But tell me, to tell everybody else, who's Bowman and Associates? And
Rick Bowman was an entrepreneur that developed the pipe business, and he brokered he owned literally nothing in inventory. He bought here and sold there. And knowing all the different distributors around the United States gave him access to materials and surplus and helped develop into a pretty good business. He moved back to Seattle, where he was from, and had a big office over there. I was running the Spokane office, so to speak. When we went busted, why, come to find out, Spokane was doing 80% of the business.
And what years are we talking? When did you start?
I started at Bowman in 1980, and I left there when he went bankrupt, I think in 83, something like that.
Yeah, because Rick Bowman was, he had a far reach.
Yes.
Across the nation in that different, still in the steel pipe business, but kind of a different paradigm as to how he went about doing business.
Well, using that as a pattern, I developed a pretty good following, and I was certain industries I was doing, like we said, 80% of the company's business, and it's very large.
And when I remember that when Bowman and Associates folded up, went bankrupt, or however you want to term it, and you started CW Sales.
Correct.
Of course, Chuck Wooley, your own company, CW Sales over in Post Falls, Idaho.
Correct.
I can remember that office today, just like it was yesterday. Tell me about that. What year was that you started CW Sales?
That was 1983, I think, or probably 84, early part of 84. And didn't take me very long because of the size of business I was doing, to exhaust my capital. And lo and behold, about that time, Kelly Pipe was my largest customer. And the president, Don Feinberg, called and asked me if I would not work for Kelly Pipe. I said, well, I had trouble working for large corporations. And Don says, just send me a letter, fax me a letter, tell me how it would have to be. So I made up this silly dream and sent it to him. And about 20 minutes later, he calls me and says, that'll be fine. And that kind of startled me. And then he came up, introduced himself to the people in Coeur d'Alene that I had working for me, and said that I had to be at a board meeting in Van Nuys, California with the Shapiro family the following Tuesday. And I was rather perplexed because I was stepping into a large pair of shoes at this time. And I went down and met with them and sat around the boardroom with this group of people, the Shapiros, Bernie, Leonard, and all the people on the board. They asked me a million questions. And then Bernie says, I understand you have a problem working for large corporations. I said, well, I'll just tell you what I think. I said, I'll answer to you, answer to the president. I said, anybody else can kiss my rubber ducky, and if you don't like it, take me back to the airport. Bernie looked at me and says, that'll be fine. And it's been a wonderful relationship, marvelous family, and a great company to be a part of.
Oh, that's fantastic.
I've been to the office 7 times in 35 years.
And when you say the office, you mean the
corporate office, Santa Fe Springs. Santa Fe Springs. And they've been to my office 3 times and always brought in the corporate jet when we were flying to Alaska fishing. But otherwise, I don't think they would have darkened my doorway. But it's been a wonderful relationship. They let me go literally work any place in the world that I wanted to do business. And we did some major projects in Russia, Africa, South America, Australia, New Zealand. And these are sizable packages, but it overwhelmed the pipe industry because these projects were shipping out of the United States. One project in Russia had 12,000 containers that were shipped to cover the project.
And I'm guessing the mining industry is.
That was the mining industry, but you were supplying odds and ends, as they called it. I sold, I don't know how many steel bridges in Russia. They were maybe bridges fabricated in England. I was appointed a distributor for them for Russia. And we shipped bridges in there for the mining operation. This project was 11,000 feet, so everything had to be designed for high altitude. And we shipped in enough steel to do an entire tank farm. And that, just the plate involved covered 18 carloads. We bought that out of Russia and the Ukraine, and it was shipped to the job site. And the mafia came in and wanted the plate because this is 1990 when things were very tight and Russia had just flipped over. And the mafia moved in and demanded the plate.
You're talking the Russian mafia.
Russian mafia.
Right.
And they wanted to take over the plate. Military escorted the plate to the job site, and the mafia was upset, and they came in and shot the mill manager at his desk in his office, killed him. And but we got our plate. They said it's some of the best steel they'd worked with by the people. We supplied a couple of helicopters. We supplied hospitals, equipment and supplies, whatever the requisition is for. And they were...
And you were the point man for all that.
But it was real strange because you get a call from corporate and they say, Chuck, what are you doing now? I say, what's up? They said, well, we got $500,000 deposited in our account and we suspect you're the guilty party. I said, well, we'll probably find out. And in 3-4 days, you get a purchase order for it. They paid for everything in advance before it was ever shipped because it was, the company policy was, if it left the confines of the United States, we wanted paid up front. So I had all the money come in advance and we shipped it all. And we did that for about 1.5 years, shipping all the materials in. And they bought the containers. It was handled by Walrus. And the containers were all insulated, specified, and they took those in the operation, made office buildings, made homes for people, apartment complexes.
Sure.
Was all made at this rural site in Russia. And kind of interesting to see everything.
Very interesting. Yeah, that's a cool story.
Earl Cole was our president at the time. One of the weird things that happened was there was 1,500 expats, which are people from Canada and the United States.
Expatriates.
Working on the job site. And at 11,000 feet, a lot of people getting altitude sickness. Well, the people were curious as to why some people got sick, some people didn't. So they got to studying the habits of the people that got sick and the ones that didn't. They found out if you're a chain smoker, you could adjust to the altitude, no problem. The people that didn't smoke all got altitude sickness and had to be shipped home.
You would have thought it would have been the opposite.
I mean, you'd logically think the other way, but it was just unusual, and these people all were missing the comforts of what they would get in the States or in Canada. I got a request saying, we cannot get what we like to drink over here. So I loaded up a container with $3,500 worth of pre-ordered booze for them. Filled the whole back of the container with paper products so we could get it across the border into Russia. Shipped it clear to the job site, and then I sent on my monthly vouchers for my expenses, I sent a bill into the company for lunch for $3,500. Mr. Cohen calls and he said, Chuck, we've been pretty lenient with you, but $3,500 for a lunch for somebody in Russia? I says, well, it might not be a question you really want to ask. He says, why? I said, well, there was quite a bit of booze involved in that shipment. He said, okay, paid, no questions were asked, and that took care of it. But like I say, the company is very gracious in letting me work. And there was a group of people that went from mine to mine to mine. So we started in South America, we went to Russia, then we went to Canada, then we went to Egypt.
Just moving from project to project.
Project to project.
Sure.
And that kept me busy for about 5 or 6 years.
Wow, that's an interesting story.
One of the mill ventures, I was inspecting a mill in Annaba, Algeria. And we went in to get into Algeria, which is a country that's not recognized by the U.S. as being friendly. I had to go into Paris, go to their embassy, get a visa. Then I had to go to the U.S. embassy and sign my life away that if anything happened, there would be no help coming. And I was traveling with a guy by the name of Michael Kidd out of South Africa. We fly into Annaba, and he says, we were in Marseille, and he said, we have to pick up a little bit of gifts which included coffee, some booze, cognac, and stuff like this, which is, Algeria is a dry country. And we're walking down the confines of the airport to go through customs, and I look up at the marquee, and what it's saying is very plain English: everything but drugs I have in my possession in these two shopping bags I'm carrying. I said, Michael, what are you doing? Michael says, no problem. We get down and get in line for customs. Michael waves at a customs agent. A side door opens. We step out into the street, into a vehicle, and we drove away. That was clearing customs. That night, a customs agent shows up in our hotel room, which is a very fine 5-star hotel. That's 7 stories, 7-story hotel, 5-star, and you get a little nervous when you open the door, unlock your door, and you have a bellboy with you, and you step into a closet, and you lock the door behind you, then you unlock the door into your room. You get into your room, and here you are on the top floor, and there's a steel grate in front of the window. The bellboy cranks up the window grates. He said, whenever it turns dark, you put the window shades down. And that will stop you from being shot. And then I look at the bed. I'm 6'4". All the beds over there are only 5 foot long. And so I had to get another set of bedding, push an ottoman out to the end of the bed, and had 2 sets of everything to cover my body whenever I laid down. Being the fine establishment that it was, you looked at it and you turn out the lights, and then for some reason I got back up and I turned the lights on. Well, when you turn the lights out, all the bugs come out of the wall. But if you leave the lights on all night, they stay on the wall. So you left your lights on all the time.
And here you were a pipe salesman.
Right.
And what am I doing here?
Well, at the time...
Am I James Bond, or am I...
I was in there inspecting materials, and at that time, the mill was being certified for API. So everybody was there. There was a Russian mill, management mill, put in by the Russians. And to show you the life over there, some of the Russians were complaining about some of the local help doing this or doing that. They said, okay, this guy did this, well, okay. They go over and they cut his arm off. They cut the leg off of another guy because they didn't like what he was doing. The Russians went back into their compound and they finished the project and never came out. And Russians are fairly cold-blooded, but that was a lot colder than theirs.
Right.
And it was just, the whole thing was an eye-opening experience. When you checked into the country, I had to show the guy from customs how much money I had. Well, Michael and I split up and we've been traveling to other places in Europe, and he owed me $75. Well, when customs came to my room to clear me to go to the airport, I had $75 more than I was supposed to have, because you have to get little bank receipts for everything that you do. They said, well, that's 90 days in jail, and you can expect to live about 36, 38 days, and the only thing you can take into the jail cell with you is your little bag of toiletries. And that's it. Well, they said you'll be under house arrest for 2 days to get your affairs in order. You can't call anybody at the American consulate or any place for help. So I got a hold of one of the bellboys that spoke English, had him go get the mill manager, and the mill manager came down and got me out. Otherwise, I would be buried someplace in Algeria.
Man, alive.
And I was 4 days behind schedule. The company did not know where I was at. My family knew that I'd disappeared. And I was very pleased to get back landed in JFK in New York, I wanted to get out and kiss the ground.
I bet so. I bet so.
Anyway.
Man, alive, those aren't stories from normal pipe peddlers.
No. Well, all the other pipe salesmen had the good customers. I got what was left over.
I love it. That's great. Those are awesome stories. I wanted to ask you, one of the things that I like to ask everybody are the changes over the years. You started in the pipe business, or the steel business rather, 55 years ago in 1964. And you and I were joking the other day where I still had an old telefax from
Right.
CW Sales.
That's a good point, because when I first went to work for Kelly, I landed a fairly large project. It was a little over $5 million. And I went to this meeting. There were 35 mills at the meeting bidding the project direct. And the company I was dealing with said, you worked with engineering, you helped design and helped us through all this situation because we're not pipe people. And they said, what would you handle the project for? I gave them a percentage point. They said, that'll be fine. The president of the company was there, the vice president was there. We sat at this table, the president got up and shook my hands, and he said, okay. He said, I'll take you back to the airport. You can get in your own airplane, fly back to Coeur d'Alene. 2 hours from now, we'll call a press meeting and explain to everybody who has the job. Well, I got back to Coeur d'Alene and called the company and told them what had transpired.
Meaning Kelly Pipe.
Kelly Pipe.
Yeah.
And Kelly Pipe says, well, send us the purchase order. I said, well, we're dealing with a rather different company. I said, they shook hands. And the shaking hands at that time constituted a purchase and warranted by the company. And they were very concerned. They said, well, who is this company? So I explained to them who the company was. And they said, well, we've never heard of them. I said, well, look them up and call me back. Well, the controller called me back 30 minutes later. He said, would you ask and see if they need anything else?
Their money's good.
Yes, but they eventually sent us a contract after about 10 days of talking to them, because Kelly was not comfortable without some type of formal presentation, which I don't blame them.
Sure.
But that's the way some people in those days operated.
You bet.
A handshake was an ironclad deal.
You bet, yeah.
So you don't see that today, which is a sad point.
Right, yeah. No, very true, very true. And with the advent of, back in the day of doing handshake deals, and, today with email and, text messaging and all that, we've gone through and seen quite a few changes.
All the I's have to be dotted and all the T's have to be crossed.
That's exactly right.
And whoever wrote the last supplement saying subject to our terms and conditions,
yeah,
that's the way it is.
That's exactly right.
Too bad.
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%.
And one of the other sad points, I was just talking to Greg Summel before I came in here, that the millennials look at it on the computer. They really haven't touched a piece of pipe to know exactly what the product is, what the limitations are, what the entire spec code is for everything you're dealing with. And you can shout out some specs to them and they're totally confused. And I always say, well, you say good morning and some of them are stumped for an answer. But it's just an entirely different world.
Right, yeah, no, it sure is. If you were to give advice to a young millennial just getting into the business, what kind of advice would you give him about the steel pipe business?
Well, the steel pipe business is a wonderful industry to be involved with, but you have to develop a understanding with the customer what their needs are. You need to visit with the customer see what their applications are, get a thorough understanding as to what their limitations and liabilities are. But you have to develop a trust that is ironclad. I'm not going to circumvent you to go to an end user. I'm dealing with you only. And they develop that trust in you, and when they call in and say, this is what the customer's asked for, but the customer has a limited knowledge into the industry, and you say, well, for this application, maybe you should consider some of the other grades or products that are available, and bid them what they ask for, then say, okay, here's some alternates that might be viable for what you're doing, that might even give you a little better life expectancy than what you're looking for. And that you have to do a lot of study. You have to analyze. Don't do a lot of talking. Sit and listen to what the customer has to say. And the customer is always the one that is right. I don't care how right you are, the customer is always right. And he'll determine your future business.
Yeah, all good advice, good points. As you look back on your 55-year career, Chuck, did you at any point have someone who maybe was sort of a mentor for you that were coming up in the ranks?
There was quite a few people that I classed as that type. Lee Christensen with Christensen Pipe.
Out of Calgary.
Out of Calgary. Dave Hornacek with the same company. And Bob Simper was there. And there's a number of people, Bill Turecki, Dominion Pipe. Bill would call me on the weekends, off time, and he'd say, Chuck, what do you think about this situation or that situation? And we would converse back and forth. And there's times I would call him and ask him the same question. But those people were our shepherds, so to speak. And I think they instilled in us a great deal of being honest, upright, and trying to do the best for our customers. And there's Gary Childs with CSI was another strong person that influenced me a lot. I learned a lot from a gentleman by the name of Earl Cohen, and I've learned from John Wilson with Kelly Pipe, Vice President, Steve Livingston. I was working with him on the board. The first NASPD meeting I attended was in the Bahamas, and I think that was in the spring of annual meeting in 1985, I think. Don Feinberg was president, and Don thought the way that I was traveling around the countryside, it would be a good idea for me to get involved with the NSPD. And that was probably one of the best things I think that happened to me. I served on the board for, I think, 10 years.
With the NASPD?
With the NASPD. Never missed a meeting in that period of time. And served with, good, friendly, down-to-earth people like Shorty Kiefer of Curly's Machine. She pulled the biggest prank I ever seen on me.
I gotta hear this, because a lot of people know Shorty, and she was a character, and she truly was short.
I served on a committee with her where she was the chairman, and it was the getting new people into the membership committee. Yeah. Well, after 2 years, she stepped down and I stepped down. Well, at an annual meeting with all of the people there, she was at the podium thanking everybody for allowing her to do this. And she said, one person that's really helped me has been Chuck, and she says, I have a small present for him. and I'd like to have him come forward. Not knowing what was going to happen, I go forward. She reached down underneath the podium. She says, "Chuck, I have this plant for you to take home and put in your office, and you can watch it grow, and you can pick the little buds off of it." And she pulls out this rubber plant that had condoms tied to it. She says, "I'm sure you didn't realize they grew on plants." Well, my face was so red, I was so embarrassed. Everybody in the room was laying on the floor laughing except me. I had no comeback.
Right.
Just find the nearest exit.
Exactly.
But if you know Shorty,
yeah,
that was right in her line.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Not to say that I didn't do things to her.
Right. No. Oh, those are good stories. So you started becoming active in 1985 with the NASPD, and
right.
Yeah, I know you served multiple West Coast, Western Region vice presidencies.
Right.
Because that was about the time that I had started. My first meeting was in '87. So I remember those times, and you and I always collaborating on trying to get the meetings to Coeur d'Alene, Idaho.
Right.
It took us 30 years to get her
30
done.
years. Where's Coeur d'Alene, Idaho? How do you get there?
Yeah, those were good times. So other than, say, Curly, who were some of the other people at the NASPD back in the 80s and 90s when you were active that you hung out with, so to speak, or did a lot?
I was trying to think of Charlie's name back out of Quebec for...
Charlie Jewett, maybe?
No. He was in Canada.
Was he
Capco.
Capco, okay.
And Charlie was president, and then he had another gentleman working with him. I don't remember his name, but he passed away in Houston at a meeting, went up to his room, sat out on the edge of the bed and fell over backwards, and he was gone.
Oh my gosh.
But
Bill Salato was one gentleman.
Right, Bill Salato is who I think it was that passed away.
Is that right?
Anyway, it was a very neat group of people. There was Frank Pipe, knew all the people there, and had some good times down in Boca Raton and Sawgrass and different places like that.
Sure.
Jerry Rubenstein.
Sure.
Is Jerry still?
Jerry's doing fantastic.
Good.
I talked to him in his office the other day because he's on my target list. Been trying to track him down to get him on an interview as well.
Yeah, I run into, I think one of the last times, well, not the last time, I seen him. We both were getting on planes in San Francisco, flying to China. And I said, "Where are you going on to Mongolia?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Are you going elk hunting in Mongolia?" "No, I'm going for Marco Polo." He said, "I did the elk 2 years ago." Well, there's a group of us that was going into Mongolia to go elk hunting, and started out with 2 of us, but then some of my friends found out, and they said they didn't want to listen to all the BS for the next 10 years. They wanted to go too. So it ended up with 8 of us.
Wow, what a fun trip.
A wonderful trip. We toured, to get into Mongolia, you had to spend 4 days in China. We were guests of the tourist agency there, and they took us around, and we didn't know exactly what all we wanted to see. And I was talking to the tour guide, which was a lady, and I said, "Well, how about getting onto the military base and shooting some of the firearms?" "Oh," she says, "oh, no." I said, "Check it out." She says, "Okay, we're going to the military base." Went to the military base, and they set us...
Was it the Chinese military?
Chinese military base. We went out, and they had rocket launchers for tanks, and 50 caliber machine guns, Uzis with silencers, AK-47s with tracers, anything you wanted. And they charged you, I think it's $60 a round for the bazookas. And you could buy a 20 round clip for a 50 caliber machine gun. That cost you $10. And it was all super reasonable. And one of our friends was a doctor. And he had a lot of fun with the bazookas. He spent over $300.
I bet he never shot a bazooka.
No, he hadn't. Well, I did the same thing, and it was a lot of fun. But the amazing thing was, when we were all through, we had all this to pay for. So we all pulling out our wallets, and the guy in charge says, no, we can only accept American Express. And that's the only money they would allow them to accept.
Isn't that crazy?
They wanted to make sure there was nobody skimming anything off the top.
Right.
But it was a fantastic experience. They took us through Tiananmen Square, but we went in, and if you've never been over there, it's kind of segmented. And they took us into this clockworks, which back when the Vikings came in, they would trade a gold Swiss clock, like a mantle clock or a grandfather clock that was all gold and silver. They would trade that for a shipload of silks, teas, and spices. And this place was full of that type of material. I was in China about 6-7 years ago, and they took a tour of Tiananmen Square. I said, how come we're not going through the clockwork? I said, that's for very special people. We weren't allowed to go through, but before we were able to go through it. They had one of the original clocks, which was a drip clock, as a water clock, and there was a bucket that had a drip going into it that turned the wheel. Whenever it got so full, it would tip over and start again. And that represented like 15 minutes to fill it. But then the one that was filling it, that would represent the minute hand, and it would turn it. And consequently, it changed the whole clock by gearworks. And it was a very interesting thing to watch, and it was pretty accurate.
Wow.
But
interesting.
Well, sorry to wander from the subject.
Oh no, gosh! Talk all you want. We got plenty of tape, and no, the smart people will edit what they want, onto the deal.
This whole thing.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's very good stuff. I love it. Well, Chuck, as we're getting towards the end of our interview, one of the things I want to ask you is there something I maybe had forgotten to ask you, something that you had thought of before you and I sat down today that you wanted to share?
The only thing I would share is that the pipe industry is to me like a sacred institution, and I would recommend anybody looking for, if you haven't been educated into a special field or something, it's a very viable field to get into. The whole steel products industry is very interesting, and it's an intricate part of our American society and industries. And there's so many facets to it that you can get involved and make a good living, honorable living, and be true to your network, be true to your people, and your people and your customers are your most valuable asset.
All good advice. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing.
You're welcome. I appreciate being asked. I hope what I have said is part of reality.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Chuck. I appreciate you coming today.
Thank you.
All right.